And now I go to the third speaker for the proposition, Peadar Tóibín TD. Thank you.
I appreciate greatly the opportunity to speak with you here tonight. Just to introduce people to who we are, I'm the leader of Ireland's newest political movement, AIM2. We are a left of centre, United Ireland's human rights political party. I was with Sinn Féin for a period of about 22 years, but that political party flipped its views very quickly on the issue of the right to life, and many of us had no choice but to leave. Now, it's a shocking thing to say that AIM2 is the only nationalist Republican political party on the whole island of Ireland who simply believes that everybody should have the right to life. It's an incredible thing, the idea that every single human individual should have the right to life. Now, obviously, we think that this debate is one of the most important debates in a generation. And it's the first most important thing is that the unborn child is a living individual human being. Now, the fact that we as adults in 2020 are having a debate on whether it's right or wrong to take the life of an individual living human being is still mind-blowing in my mind. It's an incredible situation. Individual living human being, many on the pro-abortion side, will either, contradict that scientific fact or they'll try to ignore it as well. We also know that the unborn child is the most vulnerable of all human beings. And I think with modern technology, people have got to know far better unborn children. So most people meet their child for the first time at the 12-week scan. Most people have a photograph in their homes at the moment of their children, the first photograph, at the 12-week scan. Yet in the south of Ireland at the moment, you can legally end the rights that you can end that child's life for any reason whatsoever. We also know that, I suppose, human life is the most important thing that anybody has. Without it, we have nothing. And remember that an abortion, is literally the end of the world for that individual baby boy or baby girl. We approach this, to be honest, on a human rights basis. We believe, that every living human being, by definition, should have human rights. And human rights, by definition, are universal. If you remove one section of humanity from a human right, it's not actually a human right anymore. It's a sectional right. Right. So if you don't believe that unborn children should have the human right to life, well then, by definition, you're stating that the right to life isn't a human right. I also want to say that it's important that we look at the effect of legislating, because this particular motion talks about regretting its introduction into the north of Ireland. Now, one of your speakers earlier mentioned, that there's no real change if you allow for abortion in the north of Ireland. It's simply displacing abortions that were happening in Britain and allowing them to happen in the north of Ireland. In any single jurisdiction you look at where there has been an introduction in abortion, the numbers radically increase. And so, for example, in the south of Ireland, and these are figures that were given by the pro-abortion lobby before the referendum, we had about 4,500 abortions. Now, those abortions numbers in the first year of legalization after the referendum went up to 6,666. There was an increase of 40% in 1 year. So the abortion rate was falling in the south of Ireland for 18 years. It's legalized and it spikes by 40%. And that happened in Scotland when it was legalized. It happens in so many other jurisdictions as well. So remember, because that law was introduced in the south of Ireland, there are 2,200 missing people in the south of Ireland. These people would be alive, they'll be here, they'll be in existence, they'll be in their first year of life, only for that piece of legislation that was introduced. And it's the same in the north of Ireland. And remember as well, we often hear and I think it's disingenuous when some people on the pro-choice side argue about this. In the south, the statistics show 98.2% of the abortions that took place last year were healthy mothers and healthy babies. And every time we get into these discussions, people on the other side of the debate only want to talk about the 1.8% of those figures. The 98.2% are consistently ignored by commentators on this issue. So there's a radical difference in the number of abortions that happen in Ireland, north and south, compared to what is happening in Britain. In Britain, 4 out of every 20 pregnancies are ended. The lives are ended. In Ireland, North and South, before the laws were introduced, it was 1 in every 20. So 3 extra lives made it to full term in the South and in the North before the importation of these British laws and culture as well. And I just want to say is sometimes people mistake abortion for being progressive. Now, I don't know how you can make an argument for one person's lives being ended and that being progress in any way. But one of the major difficulties Áine too has with regards to abortion is the effect that it has on minorities. So if you're from a minority sector of society, you're far more likely to be aborted. Now, there's an organization in Britain called Don't Screen Us Out. Some of you might have heard it. It's an organization that's created by people with disabilities to ask people to stop aborting people with disabilities. Now think about that. We have in 2020 again, people with disabilities creating organizations to ask society to stop aborting people like themselves. It's an incredible situation. So in other European countries, we have abortion rates of 90% or more of unborn children with certain disabilities. So certain individuals with disabilities are not making it to term, and they reckon in some countries in Europe, you're not going to have any children born in future, except by accident, who have certain disabilities. And there was a health minister in the Netherlands who stated, and this is a quote from her, "If freedom of choice results in a situation where no children with Down syndrome are being born, society must accept that." Where in God's name is the progress for a situation where we eradicate a whole sector of society from us? You know, and for individuals obviously concerned, the unborn children with those disabilities, that's catastrophic, obviously. But as a society, we are much poorer if we delete the diversity of humanity from around us. People talk about life-limiting disabilities, and obviously, you know, life-limiting disabilities are fatal fetal abnormalities. Is a very, very tough diagnosis for any family to get. I have asked doctors all over Ireland, is it possible for a doctor to declare without a shadow of a doubt that an unborn child will not make it to birth outside of the womb if that child is diagnosed to have a life-limiting disability? And every single doctor says it's not possible. And actually in the South, and you won't hear about it this much, there has been cases where much wanted children were diagnosed as having a fatal fetal abnormality. The unborn child was aborted, and they found out after the abortion that the child was fully healthy. And those parents are now fighting with these hospitals for investigations into why they lost their child. In the North, in the law that is in the North at the moment, there's actually 2 sets of rights. If you're able-bodied, you have a different time limit to if you have a disability. That's the polar opposite of what equality means. The idea of gender selection abortion, and people may not have heard this, but it's estimated that there are 100 million missing women in the world due to gender selection abortion or infanticide. Now, in the debates that happened in the South, many of them led by feminists on the pro-abortion side, not once was the issue of gender selection abortion ever mentioned. And I note your previous speaker, Anne Furedi, has argued on television for the right to allow for gender selection abortion. She believes, and I hope I'm not misquoting her, and I welcome her to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I understand she believes that it should be the right to have an abortion on the basis of that child being female. In countries such as China and Britain and the US, you know, for economic, social, and cultural reasons, baby sons are kept and baby girls aren't, and that's leading to massive difficulties within society. In other countries, like in Scotland and America, they found out that if you're from an ethnic minority, you're more likely to be aborted. In New York City, and this is startling, more African American babies are aborted than are actually born. It's an incredible situation. So in a society where rightly we argue that, you know, Black lives matter, the biggest threat to Black lives in the States, the US, is actually abortion at the moment. Abortion also discriminates against poor people. If you're in the US, you are far more likely to be aborted if you're from a poor family. 75% of all unborn children aborted in the US come from low income backgrounds. If you're rich, you're far more likely to make it to full term. You know, I believe, you know, if a government really wants to help women, targeted funding to help lift families out of poverty, along with childcare and the decent living wage, they're the types of issues that lift mothers out of poverty and give real choice. It's interesting that the Tories brought this in from London into the north of Ireland, and in the south, Fine Gael introduced this in the south. There are two political parties that are not giving, economic choices to mothers, never mind any other choices at all. I hear people talk about the rights to bodily autonomy, and yet argue for one body of an individual living human being has the right to be destroyed. That's an incredible argument. If you believe in bodily autonomy, well, then bodily autonomy has to be universal as well. And, there's a funny thing, we're talking about autonomy every day these days around COVID. Most people realize that their individual autonomy can be restricted at some level. Why? To save the lives of the most vulnerable. That's the logic of most countries' campaigns currently. I and Áine believe very strongly that we are all responsible for each other, no matter how frail, how vulnerable. We live under the same sky. We have to fight right through society to protect all mothers and all children.